Everyone fled from the arena, except the blind kid who faced the bull alone. The gates slammed open with a sharp clang that cut through the cheers like a blade. Dust burst into the air. Then came the sound, deep pounding hooves tearing across the packed dirt. Revenant charged out of the pen like a storm unchained, all muscle and fury, the whites of his eyes flashing like lightning. His massive head lowered, his horns slicing through the air as he picked up speed. The crowd at Valor Heights Arena erupted into wild applause, whistles, and shouts, until the first boy tripped. A gasp swept through the bleachers as the fallen rider scrambled to his feet and bolted toward the fence. Another boy screamed, his boot lost in the dirt, and fled. Within seconds, the tightly packed group of 12 scattered like birds before a wildfire. All except one. 15-year-old Caleb Morrow stood alone in the middle of the arena, his boots planted firm, his white cane hanging loose in his right hand. He didn't run. He didn't even flinch. His head tilted slightly like he was listening for something others couldn't hear. To the crowd it looked like insanity. Blind boy in the ring with a bull that had shattered ribs, paralyzed riders, and sent seasoned cowboys into retirement. To Clay Riker, watching from the stands, it looked like the first step of a plan they'd practiced for 6 relentless months. Revenant's hooves thundered against the ground as he skidded around in a circle, searching for movement. His breath came in heavy huffs, fogging the air. Saliva foamed at the edges of his mouth. The beast wasn't confused. He was irritated. There was no one else left to chase, only this still figure in front of him. Clay didn't blink. He watched Caleb closely, his fists clenched so tightly on the railing his knuckles had turned white. 100 feet below, Caleb slowly lowered his cane to the ground, letting the tip lightly scrape the surface. He wasn't looking for balance. He was listening, for echo, vibration, density. The arena had different textures in different places, packed soil in the center, softer sawdust near the gates, metal bolts reinforcing the western wall. Revenant's hooves sounded different depending on where he stepped, and Caleb had memorized every nuance. "Move, kid!" someone in the crowd shouted. "Get out of there!" another voice echoed. But Caleb didn't move. He exhaled through his nose, slow and measured, his ears twitching at the ambient sounds. The announcer went quiet. Even the music had stopped. Revenant turned toward him at last. The bull stilled, lowered his head, and began scraping the ground with one hoof. The sight of it made several women in the stands cover their mouths. A boy near the rail closed his eyes, and Clay's heart pounded like a drum against his ribs. The bull charged. Caleb didn't hesitate. Just before the impact, he dropped to his knees, folding inward. To the crowd, it looked like a last-second collapse, a breakdown of nerve. But Revenant misjudged the shift in form. His trajectory skewed as he tried to adjust mid-charge, his bulk overshooting the collapsed target. That alone would have saved Caleb's life. But it wasn't enough. At the perfect moment, Caleb lifted the cane and struck it down hard on the dirt just inches from his left foot. The sharp clang of the metal tip against a concealed ring bolt rang through the arena like a dinner bell. Revenant's front leg hit the ground exactly where the sound had come from. The bull slipped. His hoof slid sideways in the loosened dirt, throwing his balance off. He buckled slightly, stumbling past Caleb by mere inches. A collective gasp tore through the stands. Someone dropped their drink. Another screamed. Revenant skidded to a stop several yards away, wheeled around, and snorted so hard the dust exploded off the ground. Caleb stood slowly, his movements careful and calculated. His left sleeve was streaked with dirt from the fall. A faint trail of sweat lined his jaw. He turned his face slightly toward the snorting beast, listening. He could hear the deep chest rumbles, the shifting of hooves, the angry swish of the tail. He could even smell the mixture of soil, leather, and adrenaline that clung to Revenant like smoke. On the raised platform, one of the arena judges leaned forward, whispering to another, "That cane strike, was that luck?" Clay didn't look away. "No," he muttered. "That was training. Was..." Back in the arena, Caleb shifted his feet 1 inch to the right. He dragged the cane across the dirt again, tracing a line like a fencer lining up a strike. His eyes, milky but sharp in focus, didn't blink. Revenant charged again, faster this time. The massive bull cut through the arena like a living locomotive, aiming not for the boy's center, but to his side. Caleb had heard the angle shift, hooves hitting the harder soil pattern. He pivoted and swung his cane in a tight arc, letting it whistle through the air before it smacked a loose panel on the ground. Crack! The bull flinched at the unexpected sound, just enough to hesitate, and that half-step hesitation turned momentum into chaos. Revenant stumbled again and crashed shoulder first into the metal fence. The arena rattled. Roars of disbelief erupted from the crowd. People stood up. Cameras zoomed in. Caleb stood still once more. He didn't smile for the crowd. He smiled because he could hear the pattern in Revenant's breathing, the first sign of fatigue. The small stumble had taxed him more than expected. The bull had burned energy, and Caleb had barely moved. High above, inside the control booth, a man in a pressed gray suit leaned toward the microphone but didn't press it. His name was Marcus Lyle, director of the Rodeo Sponsors Committee. His jaw was tight. "That kid's not supposed to still be in there," he muttered. Beside him, an assistant blinked. "Should we call it?" Marcus didn't answer. His eyes narrowed. "Let's see what happens next." On the arena floor, Caleb shifted his weight and prepared. He dragged his cane again, just slightly. It wasn't for distraction. It was for mapping. He was standing on firmer earth now. The bull would turn and come again, and when he did, the boy would be ready. Revenant snorted. His chest heaved. He pawed the ground again. Caleb waited. Time slowed. The crowd leaned forward. Clay stopped breathing. And then the bull came. Like thunder across the earth, he barreled forward one final time. Caleb didn't run. He didn't dodge. He didn't flinch. He just waited for the rhythm, the exact moment when the hooves would land on the slightly hollow earth beneath the center plank, and then struck the cane down again with surgical precision. Clang! Revenant, in full speed, hit the uneven footing, twisted and veered off course just enough to stumble past Caleb for a third time. This time, Caleb turned with him slowly and raised his face toward the animal. The stadium was silent now. Even the cameras had stopped panning. Everyone, every single person, was watching a blind boy face a beast alone and not just survive, but outthink it. Revenant came to a slow halt several feet away, sides heaving, confused. This boy didn't run. He didn't scream. He didn't do what the others did. Revenant stomped his hoof once, twice, uncertain. Caleb lowered the cane again, his expression calm, steady, focused. He whispered into the still air, so quiet only those closest could hear it, his voice barely above breath. "Again!" A medic lunged forward from the sidelines, vaulting halfway up the fence with a first aid kit in hand. His face was pale, eyes locked on the boy still standing in the arena. "We need to pull him out!" he shouted. Two officials immediately grabbed him and pulled him back. "Let him finish!" one snapped, breath quick and hands shaking. The crowd behind them buzzed with confusion and fear. Some stood up in their seats. Others stayed frozen, hands over mouths. The silence that had followed Caleb's last whisper, "again," was now giving way to rising panic. Clay Riker didn't move. His grip on the railing had tightened to the point that his fingers had gone bloodless. He'd seen this kind of silence before, in war zones, in training camps, and once in a blindfolded cavalry drill that had ended with a horse kneeling beside its rider. Caleb wasn't just reacting to danger, he was orchestrating it, reading the vibrations in the ground like a map, using sound the way others used sight. Revenant had begun to circle now. He snorted low, deep in his throat, a sound that echoed around the walls of the arena like a drumbeat building toward something catastrophic. The bull wasn't just angry. He was confused, humiliated. He had never missed 3 times in a row, and never once had a target just stood there and asked for more. Caleb, standing in the center, angled his head slightly to the left. His ears twitched, picking up the faint scuff of hooves against the far end of the arena wall. He adjusted his footing carefully, no more than a couple inches, and lowered the cane to the dirt again. This time he didn't strike hard. He tapped softly. A rhythmic click-click. Not loud enough to startle, but enough to attract. Revenant paused. Then, with a roar and a blast of dirt, the bull charged again. Clay leaned forward. "He's baiting him," he whispered under his breath. "Come on, Caleb." At the last possible second, just as the bull came within striking distance, Caleb stepped sideways, not a dodge but a redirection, and swung his cane with a tight snap across Revenant's left front leg. The sound of it hitting muscle echoed with a thud that made even the officials wince. Revenant cried out, not in pain, but in startled frustration. His momentum twisted. He lost footing. His hind legs swung out awkwardly, and his shoulder slammed into the center arena post with a heavy clang of steel meeting flesh. The crowd erupted, some in cheers, others in disbelief. Up in the executive section, Marcus Lyle's fingers twitched against the railing of the press box. His face was tight, lips pursed in a thin, angry line. He turned to the man standing behind him, a lean technician wearing a headset. "This wasn't supposed to happen," Marcus muttered. The technician glanced at him nervously. "Sir?" Marcus didn't answer. He just stared down at the boy in the arena, jaw locked. Revenant wasn't just a bull. He was a weapon, a product. A spectacle designed to put fear into the audience and send a clear message to anyone who dared question the traditions of rodeo sport. Caleb was supposed to be that message. Proof that inclusion had its limits. That some dreams were too far. He'd even arranged it. The other boys? Paid off. Told to make a show and exit once the bull was released. The arena floor would be cleared, the cameras zoomed in, and the lesson made. But this wasn't the lesson Marcus wanted the crowd to learn. Back in the arena, Caleb stood still again, chest rising and falling. His shoulder ached. The flick of the cane had strained something. He could feel it in the muscle, tight and hot. But the greater warning came through the ground itself. It had gone quiet. Too quiet. Revenant wasn't pacing, wasn't snorting. He was still, somewhere, listening, watching. Caleb narrowed his eyes and rotated his head like a radar dish. He angled his ears toward the direction of the breeze, the faint hiss of the sawdust shifting. Then came the rush. No warning, no scrape, just wind. Caleb ducked instantly, his instincts sharp, but not sharp enough. Revenant clipped his right shoulder with the edge of a horn, knocking him clean off his feet. He hit the ground hard, rolled once, and came up gasping, his left hand cradling his arm. Blood trickled from a cut near his elbow. Clay Riker stood halfway up the railing now, one boot braced on the bottom bar. His heart was hammering so hard he could hear it in his ears. "Come on, kid," he whispered. Revenant had turned again. The beast was ready to end it now. Caleb could hear the hooves approaching, steady and brutal. He rose slowly to one knee, dragging air into his lungs. His fingers brushed his back pocket. Something was there, a final option, one he hadn't dared to try. Not yet. But now? He had no choice. His fingers closed around the short length of rope. He pulled it out. At the end of the cord was a tiny bell, old, tarnished, the kind used in early-stage training to guide bulls gently. It had been Clay's idea, something they'd only practiced with once, and only in theory. The bell had been part of Revenant's imprinting as a calf. Food, calm, rest, safety. Caleb's hand shook as he held the bell out to his side. He let it hang loose, then swung it low, slow, and wide. The bell jingled. Not loudly, but clearly. The sound echoed once around the walls. Revenant stopped mid-charge, skidded slightly, snorted. Caleb felt it, the hesitation, the crack in the wall. He swung the bell again. This time the bull's breathing changed. The aggression softened into confusion. He didn't charge. He didn't stomp. He just watched. Caleb rose to his feet, his injured arm hanging limp. Each step he took now was precise, slow, measured. He repositioned himself back toward the center, letting the sound of the bell set the rhythm. In the stands, no one spoke, not even the announcers. Thousands of people held their breath. At the top of the arena, Marcus Lyle cursed under his breath and backed away from the railing. He picked up a radio, voice trembling. "Cut the cameras!" he snapped. The technician didn't move. "I said cut them!" But the cameras stayed on. In the arena, Caleb stopped walking. He faced the bull fully now, the bell still swaying in his fingers. Revenant snorted once, loud, but didn't charge. Caleb tilted his head, tracking the movement. Then, he spoke, not loudly, not with fear, but with quiet certainty. "Come on," he said. And this time, it wasn't a challenge, it was a command. Revenant charged, but there was hesitation in the thunder of his hooves. His pace, though forceful, had lost its chaos. The wildness, the fury that had made the crowd tremble earlier, now seemed restrained. Caleb felt it in the vibrations under his boots, in the change of rhythm, slower, more measured. He didn't step back, didn't even brace. He simply stood with one hand outstretched, the small bell at the end of the rope dangling beside his thigh. The gentle jingling sound drifted across the arena, soft and deliberate, like a lullaby echoing through a cavern. The audience, thousands strong, stopped breathing. Some leaned forward, others gripped the edge of their seats, not sure whether to scream or pray. Revenant's stride shortened. His nostrils flared as he skidded to a halt 10 feet away from the boy. His massive chest heaved as if confused. He lowered his head but didn't charge. He stood still, snorting, as if trying to understand what this human was. This boy who didn't fear him, who didn't run. Somewhere in the back rows, a single pair of hands clapped. A child. The soft sound echoed louder than expected. 2 more clapped in response. Then a dozen. Then hundreds. It was not a cheer of victory, but something closer to awe. Caleb turned his head slightly toward the noise but didn't smile. He reached out his free hand, palm open. The gesture was slow, respectful, like he was offering a greeting, not a command. The silence from the bull told him enough. Revenant didn't move. He didn't shift his weight, didn't toss his head. He simply watched. Clay Riker's mouth had gone dry. He stared down from the stands, eyes wide, disbelief etched across his weathered face. "This isn't survival," he muttered aloud, voice rough and shaken. "This is control." He wasn't wrong. Caleb had done something most seasoned riders never could. He hadn't broken Revenant. He hadn't fought him. He had calmed him, connected to him, trained himself to hear what others never bothered to listen for. And now, in the most dangerous arena in the state, in front of cameras and judges and doubters, the boy and the beast stood in stillness together, 2 sides of a storm that had made peace. Then, without warning, a loud siren blared through the speakers, a piercing industrial sound that shattered the silence and yanked everyone out of the moment. Revenant reared, his muscles rippling in alarm, snorting loudly as his hooves slammed the ground. Caleb flinched, his hand retracting instinctively. Security guards rushed onto the field. 4 men in black vests sprinted toward the boy and the bull from opposite ends of the arena. One barked into a walkie-talkie, another reached for a sidearm. The announcer's voice, cracked with tension, rang out over the speakers. "The match has been disqualified for rule violations." Gasps exploded through the crowd. Some people stood up in protest. Others shouted in confusion. Caleb stood frozen, his lips parted, his face pale. He couldn't see the guards, but he could hear their boots slamming against the dirt, could hear Revenant's breathing accelerate, panic rising in the animal's chest. The bond they'd just formed was breaking apart. One of the guards raised a tranquilizer rifle. From the stands, Clay jumped up and bellowed, "Don't!" But the shot fired. The dart missed the bull and struck the ground inches from Caleb's foot. Revenant panicked. He let out a piercing bellow and reared violently, his front legs clawing the air before slamming down. He twisted and bolted, charging toward the east gate in a wild, unplanned escape. "Get that gate closed!" a voice shouted. But Caleb was already moving. He knew the sound of that gate's hinges, the metallic groan they made when opened, the echo it sent when slammed shut. He turned hard and ran, pain jolting up his injured arm. Every step was calculated from memory. He reached the gate first, stumbled against the latch, found it by touch, and slammed it shut just as Revenant arrived. Dust burst up around him. Revenant skidded, inches from trampling the boy, but he didn't strike. Caleb turned, arms wide, chest heaving. He felt the heat first, hot breath blasting against his ribs, then the gentle pressure of a heavy head pressing into his side. Revenant didn't push, didn't threaten. He leaned in, slow and deliberate, as if seeking safety in the only calm left inside the chaos. And Caleb stood still. The arena fell into utter silence. The crowd, once a roaring sea of judgment and doubt, was now stone quiet. Not even a camera clicked. The boy and the bull stood there, unmoving, connected not by leash or rope, but by something wordless, something earned. The security team paused, not knowing what to do. On the far side of the arena, a man in a pressed blazer stormed through the entrance gate. His hair was combed, his jaw tight. His voice rang out across the dirt. "End this nonsense now." Marcus Lyle. He stomped toward the officials with fire in his eyes, waving a sheet of paper in one hand. "This whole match is a violation. That boy broke protocol. He entered under false pretense. Shut it down." Clay Riker had seen enough. He climbed the fence and dropped down into the arena without hesitation. The moment his boots hit the dirt, the guards turned to stop him, but paused when he raised one hand, firm and unafraid. Clay stepped into Marcus's path, planting himself between the man and the boy. "You touch that kid," Clay growled, voice low and cold, "and I'll bury you under this arena." Marcus blinked, caught off guard. "You're protecting this circus? This fraud?" Clay's eyes narrowed. "I'm protecting the only one in this place who's earned respect." Behind them, the guards hesitated. Then came the sound of a microphone left live. It crackled across the loudspeakers. "I didn't mean to. I didn't think he'd actually stay in." The voice belonged to one of the boys from earlier, the youngest of the 12, standing near the bleachers. His hands were shaking. A headset dangled from his ear. His eyes were wide with guilt. I took the money," he stammered. "We all did. He told us to run after the bull came out. Said it was just for the cameras. Said it wasn't safe for someone like him to be in there." Gasps filled the stands. Cameras spun on their tracks. Reporters stood, phones in hand. Marcus froze. The boy stepped forward, trembling. "I'm sorry. Caleb didn't know. He didn't run because he thought the match was real." Silence followed. Then murmurs, shock, outrage. The announcer said nothing. For the first time that night, his microphone stayed off. Caleb hadn't moved. His hand still rested on Revenant's broad forehead. He leaned in slightly, resting his cheek against the bull's coarse hide. He whispered softly, so only the animal could hear. "Now they see." The arena that had once echoed with cheers, panic, and disbelief now sat still under the golden haze of a setting sun. Valor Heights Arena, home to the legendary Ironside Rodeo, was locked down. The bleachers were empty, the banners stripped, and the bullpen silent. Weeks had passed since that unforgettable night, but the dust had not yet settled. Figuratively, it was still thick in the air. The arena gates bore a single red seal, suspended, pending investigation. Inside the administrative hall, cameras flashed as a federal task force rolled out boxes labeled evidence. A reporter scribbled furiously while another read notes into a microphone. At the center of it all, escorted by 2 officers, was Marcus Lyle, his suit wrinkled, his tie undone, and his face hardened with defeat. His trial would be long and public. The charges were clear: bribery, fraud, and reckless endangerment of a minor. But the real damage was to his reputation, shredded the moment the crowd had heard that live confession. Upstairs, Clay Riker leaned against the railing of the observation deck overlooking the now silent arena. His eyes were steady, his shoulders broader than they'd looked before. A young reporter approached him, mic in hand. "Mr. Riker, can I ask you a few questions?" Clay turned, gave a small nod. "Did you know about the bribe?" "No," he replied calmly. "But I knew Caleb didn't care what the others were doing. He wasn't there to prove them wrong. He was there to prove himself right." That line ran in headlines across the nation. Meanwhile, the boys who had taken the bribe were interviewed separately, names protected, but their testimonies matched. "We were told it was just a stunt," one of them admitted. "We didn't think Caleb would actually stay in. I didn't think he'd win." Amnesty was granted in exchange for full cooperation, and all of them took it. Some came forward publicly, faces pale but honest, expressing guilt and even admiration for Caleb. But Caleb never made a statement. He stayed far from the press. He didn't want to be a symbol. He only wanted to ride. He spent his days at a temporary facility a few miles outside of Valor Heights, working quietly under Clay's watch. But this was no ordinary training ground. It was the prototype for something new, something revolutionary, a program that didn't rely on sight, but on sound, touch, and trust. Clay called it Echo Riders. The foundation received funding from unexpected places, anonymous donors, former rodeo legends, and one very quiet sponsor who sent a note with only 6 words. "You've reminded us what matters again." Caleb became the program's first student, and within days, its symbol. Clay built the curriculum from scratch, drawing from old cavalry drills used during his service, fused with techniques he had learned training blindfolded riders decades ago. Ropes were hung with chimes to help with orientation. Saddles were modified with pressure-sensitive cues. The arena had acoustic tiles carefully placed to reflect sound clearly from each corner. "Sound's not just noise," Clay said to the younger boys as they watched Caleb in awe. "It's memory. It's a map. You learn to listen right, you won't miss a single thing." The youngest rider, 7-year-old Will, tugged on Clay's coat one day. "Will I be like Caleb someday?" Clay smiled. "No, son, you'll be like you. That's the point." Revenant, the bull once feared across 3 states, was no longer listed as a rodeo asset. He had been officially retired by the governing board, not sold, not euthanized, but transported quietly to a sanctuary in Oak Hollow, just a 2-hour drive from the arena. There, he roamed peacefully in open fields. But whenever Caleb visited, the old bull trotted to the gate like a dog sensing his master. Clay drove him down every Sunday. They didn't talk much during the trip. There wasn't a need. One particular visit, Caleb brought the old bell in his pocket. He stood beside Revenant, let the bell jingle once. The bull lowered his head, brushing his side gently against Caleb's shoulder. "He still remembers," Caleb said, voice soft. Clay nodded. "So will the world." And they did. National youth programs requested access to the footage for leadership studies. Safety boards used the case as a lesson in high-risk ethics and the importance of contingency planning. Caleb's method of mapping space through sound was analyzed by universities for application in everything from sports to military navigation. But none of that mattered to Caleb. He still trained 6 days a week. He still walked with his cane. He still rode by sound. One morning, weeks later, a small crowd gathered at the entrance of Valor Heights Arena. The stadium was reopening, not for competition, but for remembrance. Where the old sponsor banners had once hung, a new steel plaque had been installed near the gate. Above it, a heavy brass bell was mounted on an iron frame. It wasn't flashy or large, but it gleamed in the morning light. Clay, standing beside Caleb, reached for the rope and pulled it gently. Ding. The sound echoed, clean, sharp, clear. A boy in the crowd removed his cap. A rider whispered a prayer, and somewhere far away a retired bull stood near a gate and raised his head toward the sound. Caleb didn't say much that day, but before he turned to leave, he paused near the plaque and traced the words carved into the stone. "Not every victory is loud. Some are earned in silence." Later that evening, as the sun dipped behind the arena and the last visitors wandered home, a breeze kicked up across the field. The bell swayed slightly and chimed once more, on its own, like memory speaking through metal. Every time it rang, it reminded everyone what had happened the night everyone fled from the arena, except the blind kid who faced the bull alone,